Title: The Battle for Briar Glen. How one man stood against the HOA president's tyranny. Randall Cole had just wrapped up a grueling 10-hour shift at the warehouse and was looking forward to nothing more than a cold beer and a peaceful evening watching the game. His modest one-story bungalow sat at the edge of Briar Glen, a suburban neighborhood with picture-perfect streets, picket fences, and lawns that looked like they were clipped with surgical precision. Randall had always felt lucky his property, while surrounded on three sides by homes under the jurisdiction of the Briar Glen Homeowners Association, fell just outside their iron grip. His home was a sanctuary from the suffocating rulebook and endless letters about aesthetic integrity. And unlike many of his neighbors, he didn't have to answer to Karen Dalton. Karen Dalton, the self-appointed queen of Briar Glen, served as president of the HOA with an iron will and a clipboard that never left her side. Her pastel cardigans and pressed khakis were as much a uniform as her perpetual expression of smug superiority. Residents whispered about her behind closed doors but rarely confronted her. Not Randall. He preferred his autonomy. But tonight, as he turned onto his street, something felt wrong. Randall slowed his truck, squinting at the sight that made his stomach drop. A massive 18-wheeler was sprawled diagonally across his front yard. The pristine lawn he had spent years cultivating now resembled a battlefield. Deep tire tracks crisscrossed the soil, and the colorful flower beds he'd planted just that weekend were a massacre of petals and broken stems. The trailer extended onto the sidewalk, blocking pedestrian access entirely. And worse, the faint chemical stench in the air suggested a leak beneath the behemoth. Stunned, Randall parked and climbed out, boots crunching on the gravel of his driveway. His chest tightened with a rising fury. Who in their right mind would park a semi-truck on someone else's lawn? He didn't have to look far for answers. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, smiling and gesturing toward the truck as she spoke to a tall man in work boots, her nephew, from the looks of him. Randall stormed across the street, every step measured and tight. "Karen," he called, trying to keep his voice level. "What the hell is this?" Karen turned with deliberate calm, her smile bright and artificial. "Oh, Randall, you've met my nephew's truck. Isn't it impressive?" Randall blinked. "Impressive? It's parked on my lawn." "Yes, well," Karen said breezily, as if she were commenting on the weather, "the Homeowners Association determined your yard was the most suitable location." Randall narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me? I'm not part of the HOA. You have no jurisdiction here." Karen tilted her head. "Technically, no. But Briar Glen has a standard, Randall. And your yard is part of the visual experience of the neighborhood." Randall stared at her. "So you just decided to use my yard without even asking me? Do you know how much damage that thing has caused?" Karen's nephew shifted uncomfortably, but Karen stood firm. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just grass. The truck will be there for a few days. My nephew's running a logistics contract nearby." Randall took a breath, fist clenched. "I don't care if it's for 5 minutes. That truck needs to be moved." Karen's expression cooled. "Randall, there's no need to be hostile. We're doing this for the community. You should show some gratitude." Randall's voice dropped, low and controlled. "Gratitude? For turning my lawn into a parking lot? This isn't about community. This is about you overstepping." Karen's nostrils flared. "As HOA president, I have a responsibility." "Not to me you don't. I'm not under your authority." By now, neighbors were starting to notice the confrontation. A few stepped onto porches, murmuring. Frank, the retired electrician 2 doors down, called out, "Karen, he's not in the HOA. You can't do this." Karen shot him a glare. "Thank you, Frank. This is an HOA matter." "You've got until tomorrow morning," Randall said flatly. "If that truck isn't gone, I'm calling the cops." He turned and walked away as Karen huffed behind him. Randall's boots hit the driveway with finality. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Part 2. The fire spreads. The following morning, Randall woke with a weight in his chest. As soon as the sunlight filtered through the blinds, he was out of bed, coffee mug in hand, standing by the front window. The truck was still there. Even worse, the overnight dew had turned the ruts into muddy furrows, sinking the tires deeper into the soil. A fresh puddle of oil glistened beneath the cab. "Unbelievable," Randall muttered, setting his coffee down and grabbing his phone. He stepped outside and began snapping pictures from every angle. Close-ups of the oil leak, the crushed flower beds, the gouged earth. Evidence. Back inside, he rifled through his filing cabinet until he found it, the property deed. Clear as day, the document confirmed his property was not under the HOA's control. Randall had chosen the location for that reason. He wasn't about to surrender that freedom now. By 8:30, he was on the phone with the county zoning office. "Let me get this straight," said Lisa, the zoning officer on the other end. "You're not part of the HOA, but they've parked an 18-wheeler on your lawn without permission?" "That's right. They have no legal authority to do that. Your property rights are protected. If they don't move it, you can absolutely file a formal complaint for trespassing and property damage." That's all I needed to hear. "Thanks, Lisa." Randall felt a surge of confidence. He printed out the photos, the deed, and his notes, then made his way across the street. Karen and her nephew were chatting again in the driveway. As Randall approached, her smile vanished. "Good morning, Randall," she said with a tight voice. "Karen, I'm giving you one more chance to do the right thing. Here's the deed to my property. I'm not under HOA jurisdiction, and I spoke to zoning. This is trespassing. That truck needs to go." Karen didn't even glance at the papers. "Randall, this is bigger than you. We're preserving the community. You can't let a little inconvenience get in the way of that." "Inconvenience? It's thousands in damage, Karen. You don't get to make decisions about my land." "I'm not asking again. Move the truck, or I go to the police." Karen's expression turned icy. "Go ahead. Call them. See what happens." And so, he did. The responding officer was professional but clearly annoyed. "So let me get this straight," the officer said, after hearing both sides. "Karen, do you have written permission from Mr. Cole to park this vehicle here?" Karen hesitated. "Well, no, but as HOA president, that has no bearing here. If he's not part of your association, you have no legal right to use his land. The truck needs to be moved immediately." Karen was livid, her mouth opening in protest before snapping shut. "Fine," she spat. "It'll be gone by tomorrow." Randall stood back, arms folded, as the officer handed him a case number. A small win, but the war wasn't over. He knew Karen too well. The next morning, the truck was still there. Randall sighed, took more photos, and called Lisa again. She walked him through the process to file a formal complaint with the county. Within the hour, it was submitted, complete with documents, images, and a copy of the police report. Later that day, Randall watched from his porch as Karen argued with her nephew beside the truck. The young man looked defeated. Randall could imagine the conversation. "This isn't worth it." Finally, Randall walked over again. Calm, but firm. "Karen, I filed with the county. If this truck isn't gone today, I'm taking legal action." "You're blowing this way out of proportion," Karen snapped. "It's just a truck. On my lawn. Causing damage. And you don't own any of it." Her nephew stepped in. "Aunt Karen, maybe we should just move it." She glared at him. "No. If we give in, we lose authority." Randall almost laughed. "Authority? You have none here. This is just you trying to control everyone." She didn't answer, just turned and stormed inside. That night, Randall sat on his porch scribbling notes. He would call a lawyer in the morning, maybe even the local news. He wasn't just defending his land now. This was about principle. Just then, a car pulled into his driveway. It was Tom, Karen's quiet husband. "Evening, Randall," Tom said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Evening, Tom. Look, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Karen gets carried away. "I talked to her, but, well, you know how she is." "I do," Randall said. "And I appreciate you trying. But this is too far." Tom nodded. "I'll talk to her again. Maybe she'll listen this time." The truck was gone by sunrise. Randall stood barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, eyes scanning the battered landscape. The lawn was mangled, but at least the monstrosity was gone. Then he sighed. A metal sign staked into the ground. Red block letters screamed, "No trespassing, HOA property." Randall burst out laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. He took a photo, then grabbed a wrench. As he wrenched the bolts loose, Karen came striding across the street. "What do you think you're doing? Removing your trash from my yard." "Again, that sign protects the neighborhood. Your lawn is an eyesore." Randall straightened. "Because you destroyed it. And you're still trespassing." Karen stepped closer, voice low. "Maybe you should stop fighting us and think about the greater good." Randall didn't flinch. "If you keep this up, Karen, I'm taking you to court." She smiled coldly. "Do it. We have resources." He watched her walk away, then returned to his porch. The sign lay on the sidewalk like a broken flag. This wasn't over. But he wasn't backing down. Part 3. The Turning Tide. The following week brought winds of change. Randall's formal complaint was not only acknowledged by the county, it triggered an internal investigation into the Briar Glen HOA. A zoning officer named Eleanor was dispatched to inspect the damage firsthand. She took one look at the gouged earth, the oil-stained grass, and the remnants of the sign and let out a long sigh. "Mr. Cole," she said, shaking her head, "this is a textbook case of overreach." Randall explained everything. Eleanor took meticulous notes, examined the deed, and listened closely. "You'll be hearing from us again soon," she assured him. "And Karen Dalton will be, too." 2 days later, a letter arrived. The county had issued a cease and desist order against the Briar Glen HOA, specifically naming Karen Dalton. The order forbade any further attempts to exercise control over properties not under the association's jurisdiction. A hefty fine was threatened if the directive was ignored. Randall read the letter twice before setting it down, a grin spreading across his face. Then came the email from the local news outlet. A neighbor, Randall suspected it was Frank, had tipped off a journalist. They were interested in covering the story as a case study in HOA abuse and homeowner resilience. At first, Randall hesitated. He wasn't the spotlight type. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. When the news crew arrived that weekend, they filmed on his porch, in front of the damaged lawn, and beside the mangled flower beds. Randall spoke plainly and honestly. He shared everything: the truck, the sign, the defiance, the threats. "People need to know," he said. "You can stand up. You don't have to roll over just because someone with a title tells you to." As they wrapped up, more neighbors gathered. Helen, Frank, and even a few younger couples who had previously stayed quiet. They thanked Randall. Some shared their own stories about Karen's petty fines, her lectures, her invasive inspections. Karen, of course, watched the entire scene unfold from behind her blinds. The story aired the following evening. Within 24 hours, Karen's position became untenable. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Under community pressure and legal risk, they voted to remove her as president. When Karen handed in her resignation, it wasn't with grace, but it was final. In her place, the board appointed a new interim president, Frank. His first act? Apologize publicly to Randall and revise the HOA charter to clarify boundaries of authority. Weeks passed. Randall repaired the lawn, replanted flowers, and repainted his porch swing. The quiet peace of Briar Glen began to return. One Saturday morning, Tom crossed the street with a six-pack in hand. "Mind if I sit?" "Not at all," Randall said, waving to the second chair. They drank in silence for a few minutes before Tom spoke. "She never thought it would go this far. She never thought anyone would push back," Randall replied. Tom nodded. "I'm sorry, again." Randall raised his beer. "Let's call it water under the ruts." They clinked bottles. By summer's end, Randall's yard looked better than ever. The grass was green and even, the flowers bloomed brighter than before, and a small wooden sign at the edge of his lawn read, "Private property, not under HOA jurisdiction." It was modest, subtle, but for Randall Cole, it was a monument to a hard-won battle. And every time he looked at it, he remembered that no matter how small a stand might seem, it could still make a difference. Because dignity, peace, and freedom, they're worth defending right down to the last blade of grass. The end.